Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon. On this episode, we welcome Napoleon buff, Mr. Cary Elwes. Mr. Elwes also has an impressive film and TV career, starring in such films as The Princess Bride, Twister, Days of Thunder, and just completed Guy Ritchie's Operation Fortune, Ruse du Guerre, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon. His television career includes such legendary shows as Seinfeld, Stranger Things, and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Mr. Elwes, or Cary if I may, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and yes, you can call me Cary.
All right, great. Well, I am extremely honored and I overwhelmed to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. So you and I spoke last week about how we both kind of got hooked on Napoleon's story, and I thought we'd start there.
Sure. My parents were both big Napoleon buffs, so I really developed an interest from them. And as soon as I began researching him, I found out that there'd been more books written about him than any other human being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he was just a fascinating guy. I was fascinated by the fact that he was a Renaissance man. You know, he had interest not just in the military, but in politics and history, literature, art, architecture, science, mathematics. I mean, he was acutely aware of his role in history and wanted to edit that role, which of course he did when he dictated his memoirs to La Casse on Saint Helena.
Now you also have a personal connection, correct?
I do. I have an ancestor who his name was John Raleigh Elwes, who fought at the Battle of Waterloo and in the 71st Highland Regiment of Foot, and he died from his wounds at that battle. So it's kind of personal.
Yeah, indeed. So there's another connection that you and I discussed, and this is how I originally reached out to you, is General Gudin, who's one of my favorites.
Yes.
He's
legendary.
He's incredible, and we'll get to his story in a minute. But what is your interest in Charles-Etienne Gudin?
He was one of Napoleon's most respected generals. Their bond spanned the whole of Napoleon's career. They were childhood friends at Brienne.
Mm-hmm.
But Gudin had acquired military distinction long before he served in the Grande Armée.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that Napoleon didn't create Gudin explains why he respected him so much as a soldier.
His early military career was similar to Napoleon's, correct? Starting at the Brienne School?
Yes. I think Napoleon was just 10 and Gudin was a year older than him. And they became friends after Gudin apparently defended Napoleon against the other students who bullied him mercilessly for his thick Corsican accent.
Right.
And I like to think that Napoleon must have recognized in Gudin some military talent, even back then, which I'm sure must have been evident, at that age, just as it was for Napoleon.
Yeah, and that school, obviously one of the finest military schools in France at the time, and
correct. Yeah,
I think that was a great training ground for both of them. I believe Marshal Davout, one of Napoleon's marshals, attended Brienne as well. Marshal Davout.
The Grande Armée's most efficient marshal.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting also that Napoleon would later fight and win a battle near their old school in 1814.
Yeah, that's the Battle of Brienne, right? They did get the chateau, but they couldn't drive the Prussians and Russians out of the city, which was
I believe the weather was horrendous as well as
I think it was.
He certainly could have used Gudin at that time, but but Davout fought in the famous 1806 Battle of Auerstadt, where Gudin plays a major role, and let's discuss that.
Okay.
So Napoleon, it goes to war with Prussia in 1806. He thinks he's fighting the main body of the Prussian army, but in fact, Davout's corps of 26,000 was the one fighting the main body of the Prussians with 64,000 troops, correct?
Right. I think you know that better than I do.
Yeah, and his division of Marshal Davout's corps was the first major formation into action at that battle, and it bore the main brunt of the fighting, and it suffered 40% casualties, which, including Gudin, who was one of the wounded. I mean, that's a large percentage of casualties division.
Yeah, that was a heavy battle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but for his valor, Gudin's division was allowed to enter Berlin at the front of the military march. I mean, Napoleon highly prized Gudin, as we both know, not just for his bravery, but for his luck. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, and that's the old saying. Napoleon always wanted "quote unquote" lucky generals.
Always.
Yeah, and from there, Gudin was made Count of the Empire in 1808.
Right.
He later fought in the battles of Ratisbon and Wagram.
Right.
And from there, I believe in 1812, he participated in the famous invasion of Russia, where he commanded a division until disaster struck. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, his rise was pretty spectacular. He and his men were the first to go to the front lines, and Gudin eventually became known as one of Napoleon's immortals. And those are the generals who'd never been defeated.
Mm-hmm.
So he really became legendary. And Napoleon awarded him his highest distinction, which is the Great Eagle in the Legion d'Honneur, and made him a governor of Fontainebleau, which was Napoleon's favorite chateau. Then, after the invasion of Russia in 1812, Gudin helped take Smolensk, I think, and then he was ordered by Napoleon to help Ney, Valentino, and anyway, he tried to push the Russians back, but it was a tough fight. It was a tough fight. And I think he was trying to cross the river Strogan or something, and he got hit by a cannonball, which shattered one of his legs above the knee, and I think the other ankle. And the surgeons had to amputate what was left of his shattered leg, but he apparently lost a lot of blood, and the wound became infected with gangrene. And the surgeons didn't really give him much hope, and so Napoleon apparently stood vigil by his bed. And 3 days later, he succumbed to his wounds at the young age of 44. And it was said that Napoleon wept, and so did Davout, who was a pretty cold-hearted guy.
That guy had iron in his heart.
And they both were weeping, apparently, which is very moving. And Napoleon wrote in his dispatches that Gudin was one of the army's most distinguished officers.
And I think that's tremendous that he would do that for his old, friend from school, and really go out of his way to commemorate and cry for his and it shows again. We were talking earlier about Napoleon and his view in history, but he was a human being. He had feelings, and it made him cry.
Absolutely. Well, he was a very passionate man, as you know. I mean, Josephine was his light, was his star, his guiding star. And when that relationship ended, he almost knew that his star was fading.
And I believe he even called her his lucky star. So.
So he believed in fate. But he was, as you say, a human, and a very passionate one. And, he ordered that Gudin's heart be removed and placed at the chapel of Père Lachaise in Paris, and that his name be inscribed on the Arc de Triomphe. Which this guy clearly held him above most others.
Correct. Yeah, agreed. And just tragic. I mean, and I the whole campaign in Russia was tragic. I mean, and I read a little bit about that battle. I guess they took a few times to try and cross that river, and it wasn't going well. So Gudin literally got up to the front lines and was trying to,
he got off his horse and tried to cross the river himself, and got hit with a volley of cannon.
So I guess Gudin's story ends there in Russia, or does it?
No, it's extraordinary. What happened is that some archaeologists discovered his body in a park in Smolensk, and he was buried underneath what used to be a dance floor, believe it or not. And apparently one of the leading archaeologists on the site, when they saw the amputated leg and the shattered ankle, they knew right away. Obviously, they had to take tests back to France, DNA tests, to be done to confirm it. But apparently the historian and the archaeologists who were on the site knew immediately that they'd found Gudin, just from the wounds that on the skeleton. And then he was given this incredible burial at Les Invalides, which is remarkable.
Yeah, right next to his emperor, right?
Absolutely, which I think is a fitting end. I love that story. I love that he was buried there. I'm sure Napoleon almost certainly would have wanted him there. So it's a fitting ending.
What do you think his overall legacy is now? There's so many facets to that question. It could be the Napoleonic Code. It could be revolutionizing military tactics. Where do you go with this?
Well, it's like a Greek tragedy, really. And it's a story of a rise from the bottom of a strong-willed and brilliant man, and his flaws eventually cause him to fall from power. I mean, it's Shakespearean, really.
Yeah. And there's acts to it too. It's like an opening act.
He was 27 when he took command of the army of Italy. 30 when he became first consul. 35 when he became emperor, and 45 at Waterloo, and 51 when he died. I mean, he accomplished all of that before he was 60. It seems unbelievable.
It's incredible. I'm 48 and I haven't done any of that stuff.
None of it.
Yeah. I'm way behind. Just ahead of his time.
He was fully aware of himself and his place in history. Yeah. Fully aware.
Yeah.
And
and it took all of Europe to defeat him, basically.
Yeah,
I mean,
basically.
So brilliant.
At St. Helena, he decides to, as I mentioned earlier, he decides to dictate his memoirs to Lacasse, so he can control. He knew that people would try and write about him, but he wanted to have the final word. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
And who knows how much of that was embellished? It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But he was very devoted to that. I think it was Gudin who said that he was the one who healed all the wounds of the revolution. And by the end of the empire, everyone was a Bonapartist.
Indeed. And that's a great line right there, because there were a lot of wounds, with the Reign of Terror and just, the tragic death of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. There were a lot of wounds in France. So that's an interesting point. Yeah. Now, you're a scholar and you're interested in this subject. I just think it'll go on forever. Like, I think his story, there's something very human about it, but I think he just had some revolutionary ideas that might be his legacy as well.
No question about it. No question. They made him, France made him their emperor, not only because he saved France from its enemies, but he defended the gains of the revolution at home. Yeah. But I think that's what is most interesting about him is that, as we mentioned earlier, he was human.
Yeah.
And because he was so extraordinary, that we have elevated him.
Yeah.
To that level.
And I think that's what needs to be brought out. Like, he did some good things for his soldiers. You mentioned earlier with Gudin and his families.
Yeah.
He had 5 kids when he died, I believe.
Yeah, no, he took care of the family. I think he gave Gudin's wife the biggest pension he could give to a general's widow. So he was very generous. Napoleon,
Yeah, and took on Prince Eugene and Hortense as his own children, even though they were his sons.
Sure.
Yeah, and talk about 2 fascinating individuals. I'll have to do an episode on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you, Mr. Elwes, Cary, for joining this episode. It was fascinating to talk to you. I would love to have you back on sometime if you would like to. This has been really, really helpful for me.
Thank you.